Oh hey, it's Wes. And this is a tough one. Last week, I gave my thoughts on the Nikon Z9. And honestly, those thoughts were easy to come by because there were some pretty clear things that I thought about that camera. I don't want to spoil it too much if you haven't watched it yet. Check that out. But the Canon R3, I am so conflicted about. Let's get into it. In many ways, the Canon R3 is a very Canon camera, more so than any of their previous mirrorless offerings. And why is that? Well, that is because it is just a solid brick of a camera that gets the job done, no matter what. In many ways, the R6 is kind of like that, but not as much as the R3. And in a very Canon way, it, in some ways, feels like it's a generation behind, but will still do the job just as well. The R5 was kind of an anomaly for Canon in the way that it came out of the gate kind of half-baked, overheating, not working the way people expected it to. Fixed a little bit later on with firmware updates, but the R3 is just a rock-solid camera. But it compares very strangely with the competition, which leads me to ask, is it even a competition for the A1 and the Z9? Which I would honestly postulate, no, it is not. If anything, it is actually competition for the A9 III, which doesn't even exist. So it's kind of in a class of its own, with a price that competes with something in an entirely different category. In reference to the whole last generation technology thing, Canon is using a lower resolution sensor to achieve comparable scan speeds and comparable performance to the A1 and the Z9. It's a little bit lazy in my books, but at the same time, it's a phenomenal camera that gets great results, especially with video. What do I think Canon's doing here? Honestly, it's a bit of a stopgap. It's a camera that signals to the competition and to Canon users, hey, we're still in this game and we can still do the best of the best with honor, sir. And it also is one that says, there is something better coming. Because there's a 3 on that, and not a 1. It's not the R1. That's still coming. That will probably be a 50-ish megapixel camera. In which case, we're looking at a very expensive camera that's not the top. How much is the R1 going to cost? Is it gonna be $6,000, $6,500, $7,000? Is it gonna cost more than the A1? Or will the R3 drop in price? See, Canon has created a very confusing situation here. If and when the A9 III comes out, I suspect that just basic performance-wise, the R3 won't be able to compete very well with it. Yeah, that might be talking a big game for Sony, but the fact of the matter is, the technology from the A1 will trickle down to the A9 III, which means that the scan speed of that sensor will be twice as high as the scan speed on the R3, which results in number 1, better mirrorless, shutterless performance. Odds are the A9 III won't require a shutter, much like the Z9, and will also result in faster polling for autofocus. There's just more data being pulled off of that sensor and being analyzed faster. But also, I have to say, I'm not sure that the A9 III is ever coming. Because as it stands between the A7 IV, the A1, and the A7S III, Sony is selling as many cameras as they can make. They're already producing as many chips as they can produce. Sorry, my cat just jumped off me and there's a giant pile of hair. But anyway, so it honestly looks like Canon's gonna be in the clear with this R3. Now, speaking of very Canon things to do, apparently Canon didn't get the memo that we're not doing this anymore. It has asymmetrical card slots, and that is an enormous disappointment, especially as a Sony fanboy user, coming from an A9 where that was pretty much the biggest mistake that Sony made in the development of that camera, with that ridiculous UHS 1 slot paired with a UHS 2 slot. This time we're moving forward a generation in our disappointments with a great compact flash type B slot and a UHS 2 SD slot. Now yeah, UHS 2 is great, but it's not going to give you the speed, and it's not going to give you all the same options as the other card slot. Whereas compared to the Z9 and the A1, they both have fully symmetrical card slots, but they both have ups and downs. The A1, in a very interesting way. You can put a UHS-2 SD card or a compact flash Type A card in there. Now, unfortunately, those Type A cards are A, expensive, B, they'll never be as fast as a Type B card, just pound for pound. Well, not pound for pound, they're tiny. And C, they'll never get to the same storage levels as a Type B card, because a Type B card just doubles everything, essentially. But looking at Canon, if you want to do like 6K video recording and super fast bursts and writing rates, you're gonna have to start doing like proxying down to one card or writing RAW to one and JPEG to the other, and man, that's a pain. So if you're all about the speed, this is going to bottleneck you a little bit, and that's a shame. Even in their press material, they say the SD slot is a convenient alternative for backups or less speed-critical shooting. Now I have to guess that when the R1 comes along, that's going to be dual CF Express Type B slots, but this is a bit of a disappointment for a camera that is otherwise so well-rounded. One place where all three cameras are different: articulation of the back screen. Canon goes for just a straight pull out and turn, which we see on a lot of cameras these days. Sony goes for the old-fashioned flip up and down, and Nikon goes for something a little bit newer and more modern, and also it looks much more sturdy. It folds out a bit and up and down. It's kind of a multi-articulation, and honestly, as a photocentric person, I much prefer the Nikon implementation. The Sony one is limited and a little bit chintzy, and the Canon one, when you're operating as a photographer, if you just want to flip the screen up, you can't. You got to pull it out and rotate it around, or yeah, it's kind of annoying because it's really, that functionality is a very video-centric function. And I've been using the A7 IV a lot, what I'm recording on right now, and honestly, when I'm shooting photography, I find the flip out screen more annoying than useful. Now that's a highly subjective thing. Some people love it, some people hate it. If I'm going as a photocentric camera, I'm gonna go with the Z9 on that screen design. Now there's one huge advantage that the R3 has over the A1 and the Z9, and that is that the A1 and the Z9 lack a medium or low resolution RAW mode. Well, why would you want that? Well, as a wedding photographer, I do not want to show up on a wedding day and take 4,000 50 megapixel images. That's just ridiculous in my books. Sure, when I'm doing commercial photography and I'm just coming home with a few pictures, 50 megapixels, it's phenomenal. As a wedding and event photographer a lot of the time, I don't want that. I literally would not shoot a wedding with an A1 if you handed it to me for free. I'd take the camera because it's great for video and again for commercial and portrait work, but I don't want that many megapixels. Whereas the Canon R3, it's just the right number of megapixels for that kind of work. But I don't know if Canon did this because they're aware of what their customers want, or because that's just where their tech was at the time. They didn't take any bold moves like Nikon did by removing the shutter completely, or what Sony did by just shoehorning everything into the body that they could, except for a nice screen. They played it safe, they made a solid, predictable, utterly reliable camera. Okay, I didn't talk about the eye tracking autofocus because I have seen way too many people where it just doesn't work for them. And that is honestly the most un-Canon thing about this camera. They have a feature on it that's kind of half-baked. And honestly, I am shocked that Canon put that into this camera at this point. It is a very uncharacteristic move on their part. But for some people, it's a fantastic feature. It just doesn't always work, unfortunately. That leaves me with a big question mark. The R1. Are the A1 and the Z9 ready to compete with the R1? Yeah. That's the question. Too many questions. Let me know what you think about the R3 compared to the competition down below in the comments, and I'll get back to you. But until next time, let's go take some photos.